Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back to the Committee of the Whole meeting. This will reconvene the meeting started on June 24th, 2024. And the first item on today's agenda is a presentation of the City of Cranbrook Recreation and Culture Service Review from Expedition Consulting. We have Justin Russo and Maxwell Harrison here to lead this along. So the floor is yours, guys, if you can hear us.
Hi there. Yeah, I can hear you loud and clear. Can you hear me?
Sure can. Welcome.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to share my screen here. So you should be able to see the presentation at this point. So if I could get verification of that.
Yeah, it's coming through.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So I'm pleased to present to you the Cranbrook Recreation Culture Service Review. We'll have an opportunity to lead you through a presentation for the next 15 minutes or so, and then an opportunity to provide answers to any questions that you might have. So the overall purpose of the project, the deliverable, was to create an independent third-party review of the city's fees and charges process and organizational structure, and then also selected service delivery enhancements. And this can be used by City Council as an input into future decisions as it sees fit. So it can be used on your annual planning processes or long-term planning processes as an input into those decisions. The process started early in this year, and we actually had an opportunity to meet with the community and staff and yourselves in February. And so we took that information as well as a series of other activities in the analysis phase in phase 3, the draft in phase 4, and now we're at the final phase, phase 5. There were a variety of community engagement activities that helped inform the report, including a public survey and staff survey, as well as a variety of community input workshops. I had an opportunity to meet with you folks in February when I was doing a tour of the community and meeting with folks. Also, the department leadership team was part of that discussion, as well as a tour around to all the facilities and kind of understanding how things are operating now, as well as a series of interviews. In total, over 1,100 people or touch points with the community were made. So we were happy with not only the quantity of responses, but also the quality of those responses. When we looked at the fees and charges, the first part of the report talks about fees and charges. There were a few things that kind of rose to the top in terms of key issues. And when we spoke with yourselves, we understood that there's concern regarding the ability of the municipality to fund services, and certainly the increase in cost of living over the past number of years has really put a strain on not only your community, but communities across the country. So that's a key issue when you're looking at recovering dollars from your user fees. There was a lack of awareness of what it costs to deliver certain services, also a reliance on the comparative analysis methodology for fee setting. And certainly, what I mean by that is looking at what other communities are doing around fees. And certainly that's a good input, but it should only be one input into your process. And then a lack of equity in the current fee structure, with some groups receiving a disproportionate level of fee subsidization, with some receiving quite a bit and others none or not a whole bunch. So the report suggests that the city should consider utilizing a benefits approach to setting fees and charges. So what is a benefits approach? Well, the core principle of it is that individuals should financially contribute to goods and services that correspond with the benefit they receive. The benefits continuum can help illustrate this a little bit. And this continuum was developed by John Crompton, who's prominent in this area many years ago. And this is adopted from that. But what we see here in this continuum is that those activities that have primarily community-wide benefit and have very little barriers to participation actually have less cost recovery. They receive more of a subsidy from the municipality. So things like public parks and trails would be in that category. And then over on the other side, those activities that primarily benefit the user, there might be certainly some broader community benefit, or you probably wouldn't offer it as a public service. But those activities that have more of a benefit to the user would have a higher cost recovery and a lower subsidy to them. And elite sport teams might fall into that category. So the report describes a process for how you would implement the benefits-based approach. The first to calculate the cost to deliver the service, and we've certainly done that in the report. There's quite a bit of work that was done around what the cost per hour for ICE is, for example, and then evaluate the community and user benefits of the service, place that service along the benefits continuum that we just described. And then there's also another set of criteria that can really help put a finer point on where you would place the recovery rate of your service. And so that fee setting criteria is part of the report, so it can be used by you in the future, and it can also be adapted by you in the future. To set the fee for the service and communicate it to the stakeholders, and then evaluate after that. And so this is kind of a proposed approach moving forward. There are some impacts of implementing this approach. We do think there's some benefits in terms of stronger methodology and justification for fee setting, that you have more informed decisions helping support that methodology, as well as increased equity among user groups, and enhanced cost recovery. And depending on how far down the road you want to go with this, you could certainly recover significantly more in terms of revenue from user fees. And some groups may actually see a significant increase in fees, and so strong communication and working with those groups will be needed. So those are some of the potential impacts. The report goes on in the next section to talk about the organization of your recreation department. And there was a few things that kind of rose to the top in terms of key findings. First, a need for more enhanced strategic direction, role clarity, and a sense of purpose through the staff team. A need for improved policies and procedures and job descriptions, as well as looking at the current skill set of individuals within the department and seeing if there's any gaps and how we fill those gaps. There's opportunity to increase facility maintenance. We did hear about that from the public, as well as the staff actually in the engagement process. Expansion of programming, and that was something the public was really looking for, and increased effectiveness and efficiency in the service provision. So one of the key deliverables of the overall project was to look at how you would organize the department in the future. And we're suggesting it is organized along these lines, with aquatics and recreation and events all under one manager. We're suggesting more recreation and coordinators, like 2 more coordinators here added to help with the programming, and then have the aquatics underneath there as well. Will certainly help streamline the service provision, enhance revenue opportunities, and certainly should enhance service. And then under the manager of administration, customer relations, and marketing, we did hear again the need for enhanced policies, procedures, really kind of stepping up the game in terms of all of those types of things within the department, as well as a need for enhanced marketing and promotions. We did hear about that from the public, and also more data-based decisions in the future. So really kind of understanding what's making the facilities tick and how and what numbers are going to help support that in the future. So that's all under this manager of administration, customer relations, and marketing. And aligned with that is the customer service reps, bookings clerk, and security as well. And then over on the right, the manager of operations, as it presently stands, aquatics was underneath that position, and this again moved over. And so this position is focused solely on operations of the facilities, really enhancing maintenance, enhancing short, medium, and long-term planning. So these were all things that came through the process, and this is how we're recommending you organize in the future. There are some benefits of doing this: better use of management resources, kind of ensuring that managers are in that leadership and management positions, and then that the kind of the day-to-day stuff is to other positions that would report to them. Stronger alignment of functions, and again, we did hear that need from the staff survey in particular. Increased programming and revenue generation, which I spoke of, as well as enhanced support for community groups. So those recreation coordinators not only would be doing direct provision of programming, but also helping community groups and supporting community groups to do programming as well. And then enhanced role clarity is another benefit of this reorganization as proposed. The reorg would see shifting or reallocating some existing positions, adding some new, as I spoke of. Also, it strives to minimize financial impacts. So unless you add the proposed new positions, in addition to the rec coordinator positions that were in there, there's very little sort of financial impact on an annual basis. So that was kind of a goal when we're moving through this as well. So there's a series of recommendations around the organizational review. One is to implement the organizational structure, update your position descriptions and qualification, identify qualifications and determining gaps in those qualifications. And if there are some working on training programs with individual employees. As mentioned, a need for more strategic planning. So developing a 10-year recreation, parks, and culture master plan will really help set that overall vision for the department moving forward, as well as your annual strategic plan, a business plan that would help support that 10-year plan. Looking at your existing policies and procedures, and there's a whole section in the report that talks about embracing organizational change, because there are some fairly big moves in here. And so, working on how would you implement that change over the next couple of years. There are a variety of other service delivery enhancements that were identified in the third part of the report. These were informed on engagement research, analysis, and the consultant assessments. And so we'll just go through the key recommendations coming out of that. The first is to establish a regional recreation and culture funding agreement. And we know there's precedent set with the fire services agreement and with the regional district. And there could be an opportunity certainly to establish one for recreation and culture. Develop a facility cost recovery plans. And this report gives you the base level of information you would need to do that. And then it becomes a philosophy around how much cost recovery you want for various aspects in the future. But that certainly is something we're recommending. Improving special event delivery. We heard a lot about events through the engagement. And so there's 15 recommendations under this one around how you could enhance your event delivery system to reduce impact on staff, but also increase service for the community. Increasing maintenance of existing facilities. And again, the organizational review and changes that are proposed are an attempt to address some of that, as well as enhancing marketing and communication for recreation and culture offerings. Again, putting that squarely under one of the managers. And then there's a series of recommendations around establishing and executing a marketing plan on an annual basis, enhancing the website, and a variety of other activities. Enhancing your facility allocation policies also came through as a priority here. And looking at your current policy, we do think that there's an opportunity to prioritize public access, for example, more than it currently does in your existing policy. So having a look at that. And then lastly, enhancing the leisure access program. And there's some suggestions around kind of automating some of the systems around that. And that came from the public that we're kind of asking that through the survey. So there's a series of service delivery enhancements that kind of shore up the third part of the report. So in conclusion, the report provides recommendations to enhance the city's recreation fees and charges process, organizational structure, and service delivery. City Council can use this information as an input into future decisions as it sees fit. So it's meant to be used as a planning tool. It's our assessment coming in, and it's intended to be used that way to help inform your decisions. So with that, I'll open it up for any questions that you may have of me.
Thank you very much, Justin. I will open the floor up. I think we'll probably go around the table. Everybody's probably got a question to you. We'll start with Councillor Setsky tonight.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you for the presentation. Over 1,100, it looked like people potentially commented. What were the priorities that were recommended from the public in Cranbrook? And then I have a second recommendation or point.
Programming was a big part of it. So more opportunities for cultural programming, for fitness programming, and more diversity in programming came through as a top priority. Yeah, that was certainly something that we heard about. We also heard about facility maintenance and upkeep, and some kind of comment. We didn't ask any real specific questions about facilities, but certainly came through in terms of a need for enhanced maintenance and kind of a desire for different new facilities, that kind of thing. So those were kind of the big things that came through.
Thank you. I had a chat with the mayor of Elkford at Summer Sounds on Thursday night, and they've implemented a parcel tax for recreation. Certainly in terms of the RDEK, and one approach to get them maybe to buy in is to do it through a parcel tax. The benefit of a parcel tax, of course, is all the money goes directly to whatever the tax was implemented for. So it might be something to push on the RDEK. I don't know if we want to consider it for Cranbrook as well, but taxpayers generally are, I won't say more eager to pay a tax where they know that where the money's going, but it often feels better if they know where the money's actually going to go.
Thank you. Charlotte, you got that? Maybe just, yeah, for logistics going forward and how we would do it and what it would involve. Yeah, like for later. I'm just saying, make sure we capture that. Yeah. Councillor Bissett.
Thank you. I don't remember when I looked through the report. I remember seeing about the fees and charges for our buildings. Did you also look at for fields, like for the soccer field, that kind of stuff?
The focus was on indoor facilities for the
Okay.
fees and charges review.
And then you also, as I recall, the Cranbrook Curling Club wasn't consulted in this. That is because we don't charge fee, like the city doesn't charge fees. Is that why?
The curling was certainly invited to participate. I think they did participate, but
Oh, I didn't see them on the, I thought I checked it over a couple times on the list, but I could be wrong. It's not like it doesn't happen.
Well, yeah, well, they're certainly invited. I mean, the whole community was invited. There's
Okay.
we can look and see who actually filled out a survey.
Okay. And then also, did you look at the cost recovery on events that was happening, whether we're breaking even, losing money, making a profit?
Yeah, well, you have a fairly, I think, strong sense of your finances on the events. So there's certainly subsidies there. And that wasn't a huge focus of our main focus was on the rental rates for ice and also the fees and charges for aquatics. And we didn't look into individual events as to whether they were breaking even or making money.
Because certainly I would think that is something that we need to talk about, whether we think as a city we should be subsidizing those type of events. And especially since your recommendation is to sort of enhance that whole area, even increasing staff in that area, I think we as a council need to look at that as we move forward.
Thank you. Councillor Graham?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, just a few comments. It's similar to what Councillor Blissett mentioned with events. I think it's important to know if we're breaking even or not. Like I don't know that. Maybe the staff does, but I don't. Around this table, there isn't a lot of knowledge around that. So I think that's something that's lacking in here to make decisions on best uses for our facilities. And yeah, and just looking at fee structures, I think that we're at a point in the community where if it costs $280 or $300 or whatever it is for ice surface, that's what it costs to rent it. That's bottom line. So I think that's something that we have to do. We already eat the costs on, maintenance and life cycle of the building. So if it costs us $280 an hour to operate the memorial, my question around that number was, does that include the Kinsman as well? I didn't see a cost for the Kinsman ice, or is that just a combined, whether it's the memorial or Kinsman, it's $280?
We focused in on memorial because the data that you had was hard to separate. So we focused in on that because it was a full-sized rink. And so that was for memorial.
So we would say Kinsman would be roughly the same price then? I just like, we're having to set rates and structures here. So like, I feel like I have half the data.
We can, maybe Maxwell, if you can comment on that a little bit. I think he's there.
If I may, just Mayor Price through to Councillor Graham. So the Kinsman and Memorial are treated as the same. They're all in the same GL for operational and revenues, but the estimate is 80-20 cost for Memorial versus 20% for Kinsman. So because it's the same staff, it's the same plant, everything is the same to operate both facilities.
Okay. Yeah, and I think that's important as we're going down this road and as we're talking about fees and charges coming up here. So I think we have to really wrap our heads around what it truly costs us to operate these buildings and what it costs to put somebody in the pool. Like it's staggering when it's $700 an hour to operate the pool. I knew it was expensive, and how do we recoup some more of those costs? So yeah, definitely looking forward to having more conversation around that.
Thank you. Councillor Popoff.
Yes, thank you. And it is in the report on page 13 where you're looking at the tax support for the Aquatic Center, for the Western Financial Arena, and then for the combined Memorial and Kinsman. And my rough math, it's about 2.5 million of tax support right now for those 4 properties. So what's that, 8% right there of where? That's 8%, I think, approximately. So that's a significant cost. I think the path we're going on when you're introducing the benefits approach and the equities in there, and some increased fees to balance that out, should offset that. In the report, it was talking about maybe turning the Kinsman Arena into a year-round dry floor. There was a lot of input for more pickleball, tennis, maybe lacrosse year-round in there. Are we seeing? Maybe this is for Trevor. Are we seeing a decrease in ice time and I know it's during the COVID years and then the downturn with Memorial, but generally is the slope a negative slope of ice time in Cranbrook?
We're not seeing any downslope. It's leveled off. It's definitely not getting higher. That is for sure.
Okay. And there is a lot of interest in the survey as well, speaking about we want indoor tennis and pickleball, especially in the wintertime. So something I think we should think about. And I really like towards the end of the report, you spoke about how we should, and it might cost a position, but look at how we can encourage and even help support organizations to host more or host new events, especially if it brings in out of town tourism dollars, economic development dollars. and it's good for our tourism. So I think that's all positive. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Just a couple of points here. Certainly, I think this council, just looking at where we are, certainly in our budget world and the realities of that nowadays, it's timely, and this is extremely timely. I think this council has to make a decision on the level of subsidizing recreation, because we're subsidizing, and what's interesting is, why will we subsidize one group and maybe not another, and the levels of the subsidies? So, and some of the information you provided will help us do that, but it's not just the facilities. So from what I understand, we probably our fields, our ball fields and soccer fields, we don't even recover the cost of the fertilizer on those, never mind all the maintenance, and the watering and things like that. So, and if you look at the cost of this stuff, it's escalating. The maintenance costs are escalating at a rate that's outpacing what our fees are. So they haven't stayed consistent. So it's all nice to keep these fees low, but I think we need to say, again, what are we going to subsidize, and what aren't we going to subsidize? I think we also need to have a serious look sooner than later at the private-public kind of partnerships. We've had a couple of groups come to us here in the last year, just kind of putting the feelers out on maybe they build a private building on city land. Maybe they buy a piece of city land in the park and they operate that area of the park. And I mean, if you really look at it, they cover all the maintenance, they cover all the building, they put their parking lot in, they put the drive-through road in, and they maintain that, all year round in their facility. So it is really zero cost to the city. And it certainly enhances the city's recreation programs going forward as well. So, you got, and there's taxation on top of that, that we would be benefiting from. So, I think that's something we seriously have to have a look at going forward. But that's all I've got. Anything else? Great report, Justin. Thank you so much. We've got a lot to think about, a lot to work with, and we'll be working with Trevor and his group there moving forward here based on your recommendations. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next up is Trevor to present the 2024 budget for the Recreation and Culture Department. So this is a carryover of our last meeting. Yes, Scott, or pardon me, Mark.
So just for council, I guess what I wanted to just mention before Trevor gets started is we did have the committee of the whole that covered off a review of, as we talked about, looking at all of the ways that we can reduce costs, sort of looking at reducing or removing services, and really taking that review to a fairly aggressive level to then go through council, and then potentially at the next meeting will come with a list of things we could talk about to the community. So we broke that rhythm because we ran out of time. So today, just to recall that, it was presentations on just some of the items that had been discussed and are worth talking to council about in a committee of the whole format today. So a lot of discussion. So Trevor will do his piece on culture and rec. We were just fortunate that this was coming up, so we were able to insert it in front of his, so it kind of seems like it's organized in a way that makes sense. And then we'll go into the 2024 capital and just review the projects that haven't been started yet. So I just wanted to remind council that that was the structure. It was just a broken meeting. We're just reconvening and carrying on. So Thank you. And Trevor, go ahead then.
Okay, thank you. All yours, Trevor.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Here we have our presentation for the department challenges, cost recoveries, and expenses, etc. One of our big department challenges right now is asset management. Working with Public Works and our asset management team, we've developed a 2-year window to get on track to make better decisions. And as you'll see there in my example, the compressor motor. So Western Financial Place has 2 compressors that operate the ice plant there. We did an emergency repair on the compressor motor in late 2023, $13,000. And at the end of this summer, we have a scheduled replacement rebuild of the other motor, which is about $8,000 estimated. So 60% difference in cost on emergency repairs versus planned maintenance. So that is one of the big things that we are focusing on for the next 2 years for a big cost savings. Staffing levels, as you saw in the Rec and Culture review, shifting staff around and adding a couple new positions. We currently sit with 77 total staff, and as you see, majority of that is a casual base or a part-time under 20. Every new staff member we hire, we estimate it's about $1,500 in training before they've actually done any work for the city. And lifeguards, which is the biggest number of staff we have and the biggest number of casuals or part-time under 20s now, it's about $1,500 a year in annual training and uniforms and whatnot. So we're working with the collective agreement and a couple of changes. Now we have more part-times versus casuals, which helps solidify job schedules, which makes life a lot easier for people when this is not their first job. Moving on to some cost savings, department savings. The first thing we're going to look at is the aquatic center. So adjusting the hours of operation for our pool. Currently we open at 6 a.m. and between 6 a.m. and 8 a.m. we have a minimal amount of swimmers, but we have consistent regular swimmers that like to swim before they go to work or whatnot, before they start their day. And same as from noon to 3 p.m. during school. We have very few swimmers in there. The life-saving program dictates how many lifeguards we have to have on. To open our pool, we have to have 3 lifeguards on. So when you have, 5 or 6 swimmers and 3 lifeguards on, the cost benefit ratio is a little off. Obviously the risk is, we have very few memberships, true memberships for the aquatic center, and a lot of them are those morning swimmers. Estimated savings just on lifeguards alone is about $75,000 a year, $5,000 a week. Moving on to our second idea is the Kinsman Arena. So not putting ice in the Kinsman Arena. Currently, going back to 2022-23 when we had a full ice season at the Memorial Kinsman, we rented out 4,053 and change total hours of ice in all 3 of our sheets. 1,000 of those were at the Kinsman Arena. On the service review that you just heard from Justin and Maxwell, we have 3,882 hours of primetime ice available between just the Memorial and WFP. So that 4,000 hours, 4,053 and 25 is total hours. So that's before school, during school, after school, weekends. Primetime ice is defined as 4 p.m. to 10 p.m. on weekdays and 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. on weekends. So it doesn't even take into effect the hours of ice available for school or during school. The big risk is, as we learned last year with the Memorial closure, is not everybody gets the ice times they want. Currently, minor hockey is usually done by 9 p.m. If they looked at extending for 1 more hour, that would, I don't think they'd have any issues with getting in their ice times. It just wouldn't be at their preferred slots. Same with the adult users that come on after minor hockey. They might end up having to skate until 10 or 11 as well. The benefits and savings, as Councillor Graham pointed out during the service review, is it's very difficult to actually figure out what it would be. But we do know that we could operate with less staff. If it was dry floor in Kinsman and ice in the Memorial, it's a very good possibility that we could operate with 1 to 2 less staff. We'd have to do a little bit more research, but you know, we'd have 1 less ice edger, 1 less Zamboni. We'd have a lot less dressing rooms and whatnot to clean. So staffing levels would definitely be down. Another option to look at is closing the curling arena. So currently there are just under 250 members. Okay, so over 300 members. Our current agreement with the curling club is a $40,000 operating fee annually, and we estimated our maintenance for 2024 to be at $49,347. On the books, we have $805,000 in capital improvements in the next 3 years, with the big ticket item being the roof, which is estimated to come due in 2027, 2028, around there. We did have an assessment done last year, which brought the estimated expense from $1 million down to $700,000. We can wait till, yeah.
You could go, might as well catch it while we're there, right? So we have Councillor Popoff had a question and Councillor
So
Bissett.
Trevor, with the curling rink, closing it, but it doesn't mean we still have to keep it maintained. We still are gonna need a roof. So I don't know where the savings is, unless we demo it, which I don't think we're gonna do.
So looking into alternative uses for the curling arena they're not very many. It's a single purpose design building. Operating it in the winter without it being a winter sport, it'd be very difficult to keep the inside warm. And the age of that building leads us to know that it's riddled with asbestos and whatnot. So doing any major upgrades would be difficult.
Sure, but the roofing of $700,000, if the structure is still gonna be up and standing, we still have to replace the roof, correct? So we're not saving $700,000 by closing curling. As long as that building's standing, at least the roof, we're gonna be on the ticket for $700,000.
I guess this is that is the conversation we need to have. What is the future of that curling arena? Is it worth continually putting more money into for, I know it's tough to say, for one specific sport. I guess that's why we're here, is to talk about it. It's $805,000 in the next 3 years, and who knows what's next.
Councillor Bissett.
That's assuming there's no grant opportunities, there's no other money coming in. And the curling club just upgraded their hall for free to with $200,000 from Columbia Basin Trust. So CBT is a funder of one-shot deals. They're not great on operating expenses, but they are good at capital costs. So, I mean, having an estimate of what it would be at the outside, but that doesn't mean the city's paying for that. So there's that. You've listed the number of members. That is not the use of the building, though. It is used by multiple groups for, first of all, the parties stuff. That's part of it. They need a roof over that. And the reason that received the funding was because there's not a lot of event space that is for that size. So it was thought of as valuable at the time. That's 2 years ago. And then also, I mean, they held the Grand Slam event not the Grand Slam, the Provincial Masters this year. There's been multiple bonspiels. And so there's people coming from all across the valley. So I think it's, same as the pool, when they have competitions, it is a regional center. It also is the best ice in the valley between here and Kelowna, actually. And I'm not sure that there was any consultation on that, on what's going on. Plus, I find it, I mean, you're looking, so yes, $700,000, that's a lot. That's how much we're subsidizing the pool every single year. Wow. So I think there are some other cost centers that we can look at for savings. I think this is just throw off, well, let's just throw that under the bus because we have this perception that it's not well used. Yeah, it's not well used all year for sure. There's other things could be done, but this was very upsetting to see being brought forth by staff. Not understand, like I'm not sure that the staff has an understanding of the value of that in our community and to people who have moved here. It's huge. And it, like, I mean, you had a picture up there of people curling in Kimberley, our team curling in Kimberley. And I really question what research has gone into this, other than just the straight, I see those costs, and so that's legit, but.
I can comment. I'll make one quick comment here. So, when we decided to take a different approach this year to budgeting, our direction was to the CAO to start at 5, when we already knew it was 8 point something from carried over last year. And we've asked them to look at anything that may be a potential. These aren't done deals. It's going to be us that decide this. So, and I know we're all going to have a passion for our if we have an activity or something that we utilize, and we're certainly, and that's part of why we're here is to defend that, or and see what the merits are. So I don't think we're here and just saying, staff, where'd you come up with this? We've asked them to look at, number one, where you can cut costs, where you can raise additional revenues. So there's about 3 options we gave them there, and I think this is a kind of one of those things that's going to get a little bit sentimental, and we could get into some good debate at the end of the day on what the ones we're going to defend and ones we're not going to. So
Further to that though, I don't recall, did I see about events, about how much we're set, like how much is each event costing at Western Financial Place? Have we broken even? Like $40,000, we could lose that on one event. Am I off on that? Because that's part of culture and recreation too.
Yeah, so speaking about special events, we really, first off, we need to pocket them 2 different ways. There's profit events and there's nonprofit events. So Canada Day is a nonprofit event. That's a $25,000 line item per year that we spend to produce Canada Day. Events like Rock the Kootenays or some of the concerts we've had in the past, Stars on Ice. Yeah, there is a risk involved in producing events. The event industry since COVID has changed the business model 1,000%. We do not have partners in this town anymore. So every event prior to COVID, prior to me moving to town, was co-promoted by somebody else in town. The only event that has been co-promoted in this town since I've been here was Rock the Kootenays 2023 and Rock the Kootenays 2024. So we are looking at business models that have substantially lower costs to bring in events, to bring in shows, because the risk is always there. If we want to host events, we have to take risk. If we don't take risk, we don't get shows. So it's finding that, middle ground of what's an acceptable risk using our resources that we have here to move ahead with these shows. Or not.
I would say one of the things we need to look at as a council is what is our job as a city? Is it hosting is it having concerts at Western Finance? Like, is that part of our mandate? Or is it maintaining like the pool, so, and recreation facilities and all that? So we need to talk about that. And so we need some specific data on that in order to make that decision.
Go ahead, Mark.
So maybe if I can just dial back to, that's why I said we broke the rhythm, because if we talk about what council was looking for is how do we reduce the impact to taxpayers in the year ahead? What are the services? What are the things that we can do to reduce or remove services across the board? And so that was the exercise that we looked at. And we want to present these things to council, and then we're going to come up with a list that I'll present to you next meeting that will then go to the taxpayer about and say in a public consultation process, we're looking at, let's say 10% tax increase, or we can do a reduction or removal of these services. Let's talk about this one at this percent, this one at this percent. Not to say that we're going to do these things, but we could talk about, let's have the conversation and then make a decision. Would you prefer to have these services? And obviously, a lot of these recreation services are very near and dear to people. If I just step back out of this context, we talk about what we talked about last time. For example, Tony presented about, let's look at the removal of snow plowing in residential areas will save this much money. Likely that's not going to be supported by the taxpayer and by council, but we should still have that conversation because we need to look at everything. We want to make sure people don't at the end of this process go, you didn't turn over all the rocks. You guys weren't, some things weren't talked about. So the council was very firm on, let's look under every rock, let's look at every service. And so that's what we're doing. Not to say anything that's on these lists is going to get done. It's just to put everything on the table out of every single department. It just so happens we're only doing one in isolation today, so it has a different focus. But we did that across the board with all departments. Some things that we've seen, like I said at the start of this process, when I asked staff to look at reductions in services, one of the comments I got back is how? The city's busier than it's ever been. The demands on our services are higher than they've ever been. Where am I going to cut? And so a lot of these things, when you look at just, this last year, when all our systems are breaking down and falling apart when it comes to things like the opioid crisis or petty crime or fire, wildfire, it's all falling down onto our emergency services. And then to look at those services to say, geez, we need to cut when they are actually, at the end of their rope coming back from fires and crimes and, it doesn't, it's a difficult conversation to even bring up or have. So that we're looking across every single area. That's the exercise that we've been given. And I'm trying to be as open and honest and just look at absolutely everything. And that's all we're doing. And if something like, if this one or residential snow clearing or anything else ends up in the public survey and it comes back, we'll hear from the public. And then council at the end of the day makes the decisions. It's just like I said, it's a broad brush approach through the whole system. That was the direction I believe I had. That's the direction I gave the directors, and that's where we've been going through. So that's all. But just nothing emotional or personal attached to anything, because every single thing we do is attached to a person. It's near and dear. Like I'll use an example. If we're going to start reducing or removing lands that we maintain within the city for park space, just the implications of that alone. When you think it costs us a lot of money to mow a lot of land that people don't touch or use, and if we were going to stop mowing it, it becomes a fire hazard or a nuisance or unsightly. If we choose to remove it, it becomes near and dear to somebody when that piece of property is removed from the system. same thing, but it costs us money to maintain it if we don't do anything. So council needs to make those conscious choices. But what we've kind of set the table for this year is that we're going to talk about these things now. We're going to come up with a list that we're going to put out to the public through the summer. And at the end of the day, in the fall, council will make the decisions, and some pretty hard decisions, but you'll have had the benefit of having the public consultation up in the lead up to that as well. So that's all. Just wanted to, you know, that's the direction I gave staff. And that's all I wanted to make sure we're clear on.
Thank you, Mark. Councillor Graham, then Councillor Chesky.
Well, I think after that statement, my points are moot. Like, why say anything until the next meeting then?
Go, Councillor Chesky.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I have to say, when I was reviewing your proposals, you've dug deeper than I think any other department has so far in terms of the presentations, and I really appreciated that. Having said that, from my perspective, getting rid of the curling rink is not on the table at all. But I appreciate how far you've gone in terms of your proposals. They would give us a lot to think about.
Back to you, Trevor.
All right, so moving on to the opposite side of the coin here, the revenue generation. Fees and charges by law, as you know, later today, we're going to talk about this again, but raising them more than our standard 2.5%. I do recall council saying we've raised it up a dime last year. So now we've taken a more significant approach, looking at individual admissions at around 15% and 10% across the board. Just for context right now, so swimming and I believe swimming in Kimberley right now for an adult is $8.01. And the proposed 15% raise in Cranbrook would put us to $7.30 an adult. So we're still behind even after raising 15%. And I believe using the service review that we just got and looking at that formula for next year, so I'm proposing a 1-year fees and charges with a bump, just to bring us up to something closer that may be proposed for next year. Using our revenue generated in 2023 actuals, bumping it 10% would give us another $117,570. So that's a 10% bump. So obviously looking at 15% on individual admissions would raise that slightly. One other thing that we're looking at is adding a facility enhancement fee, a straight across the board 5% tax on all recreation and culture. So some communities in BC are moving in this direction. I know our neighbors to the north, Kimberley, have installed a facility improvement fee on some of their items. I didn't look if it was all of their items, but that right there would just, based on the 2023 actuals, would put another $50,000 into our reserves for facilities. And the last item to look at is credit card fees. So in the city of Cranbrook, Recreation and Culture is the only department that currently does not push credit card fees back onto the consumer. So everywhere else you spend money in town with a credit card, you would pay credit card fees. So that number is a bit skewed because I don't have the ability to easily determine credit cards versus debit versus cash versus check. So if every fee was paid by credit card, it would be $28,000 in revenue. But it's more likely that's probably down around the 15 to 20% total. I mean, most of our big users pay by check, like minor hockey, for instance, and whatnot. So, and moving on, here's another idea for revenue generation. So, regional district and their portion per se to pay of what would be covering our operating deficit. So our operational expenses for 1 year in the Recreation and Culture Department are $4,985,458. And our revenues, 1.3 million with an operating deficit of $3.6 million. And using the percentage of 20% population-wise, the regional district portion would be $722,552. And that's an annual number based on budget numbers.
Councilor Graham has a question.
So I got two questions. Do we have a cost per hour of the facility that includes maintenance and depreciation and life cycle? And where I'm going with this is that if we come to a point where we charge 100% of operations, so the arena costs $280 to rent for the hour, whether you're from the RD or from Cranbrook, you're paying $280. So there's no, so would you charge above that then for an outside resident? Like, I'm just like, there's two costs at play here. There's the maintenance of the building life cycle, and our asset management on that. So like, there is a cost of the building that isn't shown in operations, but it needs to be shown somewhere because there's a cost to us on that. I think Charlotte understands where I'm kind of going with this, is like, so how do we already show people that at $280 is already a deal, because that doesn't fund the life cycle of the building. That's just to cover the operations. Just wondering how we can show that aspect, because that could play into a fee and charges bylaw where, okay, well, this is actually what it costs to run the arena with the life cycle of the building. We pay 100% of operational costs are covered because we need to recover our costs of operating. This is what the taxpayers are subsidizing with the maintenance and life cycle of the building. Here's what RD should be contributing so that it goes into the life cycle and maintenance of the building. That's just my rationale when it comes to looking at revenues and cost reductions, is how do we get to that point?
So in talking with Justin and Maxwell during the service review, that's not typically how operating costs are calculated when it comes down to subsidization percentages and whatnot. It's definitely something we can look into. I'm sure it's a number that we can factor in fairly easily now that we have the operating cost, which is the more difficult one.
And I just supplemental that, I think it's the whole point of this exercise is to think outside the box. We have to look outside the box, and traditionally, like, you're right, it's not done that way, but there's still that cost there and life cycle cost, which still factors in there. So like, I'm trying to get to a point where we truly represent what it costs for these buildings and life cycles of these buildings. So then when we go to the public, or when we're looking at costs, it's a funded building versus, okay, this just covers operations. In 10 years, we still don't have any money to fix the building, but sure, we didn't lose money on operating.
If I could just add to that, Charlotte and Scott probably understand this, is we changed the contract arrangement with the RDK for fire protection a number of years ago, and what we did is we went to 20%. And that was 20% of operating capital, any debt servicing. So it was 20% of the fire department's cost per year. We got away from that in the last contract because there was a couple of years that were out there, but you're kind of smoothing that out over the years. So you got an idea. It's very easy to do. You know, if we 5-year contract with whatever it is going to be, or same as the fire department, same as the library. We got a 5-year budget in place. We know what the capital projects, they should be paying capital projects, any debt services that we have, you know, they should be contributing to that as well. And I think we can probably determine all those costs, Councillor Graham, you know, if we base it on our 5-year budgeting. Councillor Popov.
Yes, thank you. So in the consultant's report, they did do some comparatives with ice and aquatics. And it was, so speaking of the two tiers, there's a number of communities that were identified across British Columbia and in our region that are doing 2 tiers on a number of the costs. So it's in play already. I don't think we want to go there, but if, you know, if this push comes to shove, that's what we might have to do. And also, so Trevor, I gather this year you want to do just across the board 10%, but the consultants were recommending doing that benefits approach. So that'll be for next go around. Okay, thank you.
Councillor Statsky.
Yeah, I was thinking that's probably a council decision ultimately around policy. there's kind of different levels to approaches. One is that user costs will be charged for exactly what it costs us to run those facilities. And facility maintenance is covered by general taxpayers or not. Like maybe there's some balance or figure between the two of them in the end, but and that's the kind of decisions that I think we need to be making as a council or around policy.
Mark?
So just going back to that, like that was kind of how this consultant started this whole conversation, if you recall, like the philosophy around cost recovery versus taxpayer funded for the different rec services. So what we need to do is just revisit that conversation. I think maybe at the end is just bringing that back with the analysis and see if where council's at versus when we started. Secondly, this one, it's gone off the screen. This one is another one of those sort of difficult conversations to have in the community, but it, like I'll come back to council next meeting with how we formulate the questions. But this one, it's really going to look like, do we go to a 2-tier fee system in the absence of having the regional district agree to some kind of a service fee? And that's the number that it would take to offset the cost, because we looked at the pure cost numbers before, but what the consultant drove home to us is that residents and non-residents all pay a fee to use the facility. So we had to take that money off first before we decide what's the taxpayer funded versus the not taxpayer funded at the 20% population and 80% population. So that's why that number is slightly lower, is we had to factor in that calculation. And then the implementation is that everyone is charged the higher fee unless you can prove you're a resident of Cranbrook inside the tax paying window, so that it's not the other way around. It's everybody pays the higher fee unless you can prove that you're within. So that takes some of the administrative burden off. But this one's going to be a difficult one. So either, we get the funding from the regional district or we go to 2-tier, and having that conversation publicly that'll be a challenging one. Anyway, I just wanted to point that out. This is another one that I think will be tough.
Thanks, Mark. Trevor?
And I believe that concludes the presentation.
Questions? Any further questions, guys? Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Good job. Great job. Next item is the 2024 capital plan projects. Mark, are you going to lead us on that? You and Charlotte?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and members of council. So your package also contained a listing of 2024 projects from each of the departments that have not yet been started, and some that have been started. And the intent of this portion of the agenda is for council to bring forward questions they have of any of those projects in terms of whether or not any of them should see a reduced budget or should be eliminated. Deferral is not, is probably not the way to go, in that in deferring a project, we simply push it out into the future and it's likely to cost more money at that point. So I won't go through each line item. So I would invite council to ask questions about any of the items that have been listed on the various pages, and staff is here to answer your questions. I might just add that while you're reviewing some of this information, that 2025 projects and later projects we'll be looking at those with council in the fall. But in light of the exercise we're going through with the operating budget and other areas of the financial plan, this item is part of the financial plan, and if council wishes, we should have the discussion I reviewed earlier.
Councillor Steskey.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. So I was looking at the list and I was trying to decide, quite frankly, how I would decide what's important and what isn't. And to me, from a council perspective, it was more, do we have the money in the budget to do all of the projects that are listed there, but you want us to cut some out to save some money? Or, so I was struggling with the context and I was struggling with the principle, I guess. I would thought I'd, rather say, do it with the money that you've got. It's up to staff to figure out the priorities. I don't feel comfortable at all picking, number 15 and number 30 and saying that's not a priority. So the whole approach, I guess, I find a little confusing. So can you do everything on that list within the budget that we have this year that we already approved?
So Councillor Stetsky, and through to the rest of the council, as part of that larger exercise, when we talked about the tax increases, what we said to council is we're gonna leave no stone unturned. And as Charlotte said, 2025 and beyond is coming back to council and you'll review that with a new lens. I think what we wanted to do is just give council a chance to revisit the 2024 capital, just with this new lens to say, do you still feel the same way about these projects that you did when you approved them? And if so, that's fine. If you have questions, it's simply to offer the opportunity to have those conversations. So yes, these are funded projects as per how they were set up in the budget. But remember, with every single capital project, although it doesn't affect the taxes immediately, it does take tax money to refund the reserve accounts that pay for the capital projects. So is there anything in here worth revisiting? And if there isn't, from an administration's perspective, that's great, because we'd hope to get all of these things done. The reason this is back on the table was just because of the conversations earlier in the year about the concern around costs and taxes. So we said every single rock will be turned, and and every opportunity to look at cost cutting is going to be visited and revisited, no matter how difficult. And projects are one of those things. Every one of these, we feel is necessary. But this is that opportunity to have that difficult conversation with council in light of the costs of everything that impacts taxes. So that's all we're doing today. And if there is nothing, that's perfect for us too.
Councillor Graham, then Councillor Bissett.
Yeah, I just had two, I guess, there's just three questions and they're not like, I'm just curious on the two around like the Gold Creek Dam and the Phillips Reservoir. We're down the road on both those, correct? Like those are both happening, or do we have to, like where do we officially stand on both those projects? Well, I know, I think it's, we haven't got funding. We need to spend the money to do it. I'm just curious where we're at in that relation. Like, is that borrowing that happens this year, or is that next year for those?
So through Mayor Price to Councillor Graham. So for the Gold Creek Dam project, so currently that is sitting with the province for approval. So there's various layers of approval for that one. And then in turn, staff were still seeking out grant funding or grant funding potentials to fund the construction. So the budget is there to show where like that it is kind of committed. We're planning to do it to try and help secure funding. And if we don't secure funding in the next year or so, we will need to have a conversation again how we'd like to fund it. But so yes, we're still searching out funding for that one. And then the Phillips Reservoir, the UV disinfection part, we did receive that larger grant. So we're going to be coming to council here in the near future, probably in September, for the borrowing process for the city's portion of the UV grant project.
And then one other one was around the Idlewild Park outdoor fitness and obstacle course. I thought we had talked about that going out to like Rotary or a club to just fund it rather than it sitting in here, something that we're funding. I know we did have a discussion. I'm just curious. That would be the only one I would be talking about of scratching.
Yeah.
Councillor Graham through the mayor. At this point, I don't believe we're moving forward with that project as it's a DCC project and we're working on the DCC bylaw right now. So it's something that we'll be addressing with council later in the year, early next year.
Thank you. We have Councillor Bossette.
Further to the discussions that have just happened, I look at the end of it, the money to be spent on Kinsman Arena, $18,000 on a score clock. There's a new sound system, $20,000. I would think those could be delayed until, like, I'm not sure why we would bother spending money on a score clock if they're not going to be using it for ice time.
So, Councillor Blissett, if I could just jump in, that's exactly why we're having a different conversation today than we were last fall.
Sure.
On capital projects.
Yeah.
And so thank you for saying that, because that Kinsman as a potential change in the budget cut conversation wasn't part of the conversation back when capital was approved last year. So thank you for that.
Okay. And then I'm also like, I look at a few things. I mean, yes, the seniors fitness park, that would be a provincial grant. But like cycling and pedestrian trail infrastructure, $82,000. I don't know what that's about. And I'm not sure of our role in that. I mean, those are some things we could, depending on where this is, whether regional district could kick in for those things. I don't know. But truly, I think staff need to look at these projects themselves, because I don't know, like, I get one counselor on this council who constantly is saying, stay out of the weeds. And now I'm buried in weeds. And I feel like this is the punishment for saying that we need to not have a 10% tax increase next year. We've had a tax increase. So like to say, okay, well, let's try to limit it. Well, now, hey, it's back on you guys to figure all this out on your $20,000 a year salary, man. Not cool.
You know, I guess back to council then is, that was the process that we laid out and said, this is how we'd like to step through it. If there's a different kind of process, we could do that. If council simply is going to state a policy.
It's just hard to manage all of it.
Mhm.
And then also with only partial information too. So that's part of the problem too.
Yeah, well, maybe it's how we structured the process. I think then, you know, if council doesn't feel this is a good process, then we have to go back to the drawing board on how we've structured a budget reduction review process.
Thanks, Mark. Back to Councillor Graham.
Yeah, thank you. And I think just around the process is like I feel like Cranbrook is in this spot where we're not quite a big city where it's just like, there's your tax increase figured out. Like, it's still very hands-on because we're still a smaller community, but I would agree with Councillor Blissett that you get bogged down in this. Now we're bogged down all summer in budget process for next year, when a lot of, like, it's crazy. You know, we'd meet once in July and then in September if we needed to. Now we're into budget and we're going to go to public consultation through the summer, which public won't like because they're camping. So we're not going to get anything from there. We're going to delay it anyway. And it is like, I agree. It's good to see these capital projects and we see them here, but it just invites this process of getting in the weeds, because it's like, oh, well, what is, you know, the downtown parking lot assessment? I need to see this again. You know, like that really should be, okay, where are we going here and how are we going to tackle it? Are we cutting these programs that doesn't save us tax dollars long run? No difference than if we shut down the curling rink. That's a one time. We save $700,000 maybe in 2 years. Well, it like there are things there, like how do we look at operationally what we'll do to actually reduce taxes more than just a one-time thing? And going through these projects, it might get us there on a one-time thing, but it's not going to get us there in 2 years and in 4 years. It'd be no different than just taking reserve money and subsidizing taxes next year. You got to make it up somehow. So it's like, what is what is the grand vision and how did we get to where we are? And it's like, when I look at this and see where we're headed, and I know I wasn't at the last meeting, but I kind of get an anticipation of what's happened, and I've talked to other counselors that were there. It's like, where are we going as a corporation, and do we need to look at a complete corporate review on where we're going? And we ebb and flow, and I feel like I understand government and how government works. I've been around the table a long time, and it's like it always seems like we peak when things are going down, and when things are up, we're understaffed. And it's like, so we don't really ride the trend. So it's like, how do we become more of a nimble organization that can ride the trend and weather out some of these storms? Because the money's running out, and we're seeing that. Like, the number one conversation people are having is taxes. And it's not necessarily property taxes, it's taxes in general. You're taxed at 50%, then you're paying GST, then you're paying PST, and then you're paying everything else. People are taxed to death, and they don't have any money. And we're the easy target because we're on the street. And then we have other outside entities coming in and saying, well, we need more money. And it's like, well, maybe it's not affordable. Maybe we just can't afford this. And we look at service levels, but also look at what did it cost? So like, if we talk about, okay, well, we're going to remove maybe some snow plowing. Well, how many kilometers of road was built in Cranbrook in the last 6 years of new road? And how much does it cost us what was the cost of snow plowing 6 years ago to now? Is that truly our cost driver, is snow plowing? Like, I think that there's trends that we can look at to see what is actually driving our costs here, and then hone it down into those areas rather than just a scattered approach. Like, okay, here are certain things that are driving our costs, and we're kind of getting that with, I know Charlotte's brought that forward with WCB, or we look at insurance and we look at things like that and say, okay, well, what do we need to do to maybe move away from that, or how do we deal with these costs? Because to sit here and pick apart these, that's great. We might get an immediate win, but that doesn't set us up for 26. Like, what's going to tee us up for the next 5 years, where then we can grow from there? And I think that's the process. And it's a flawed process no matter how we do it. There's no perfect way to do budgeting, but it's like, how do we tee up success for 5 years?
I guess in response to some of that, yes, it's not a perfect process. The concept has been simply to leave no stone unturned, to look at everything. And yes, there are cost drivers that have come up recently, like the WCB that we can point to. But part of the exercise was also to look at what are the things that we've accepted as a normal thing that the city does and pays for that maybe we need to revisit. So we can't just look at trends all the time. It's taking that uncomfortable deep dive into all the things that we do. And this exercise was asking staff to review it and bring those items up to council. Today with the capital projects, like I said, it's just, as Councillor Blissett pointed out a couple, like, obviously staff would catch those if we're going to change the Kinsman use. But is there anything politically that we could move away from that was a capital project? So I just want to make sure we have the conversation on every single item going into this. Going into 2025, we're going to have a much different lens applied. We just changed really at the end of the last the last budget process, it was clear that we couldn't go into the next budget process doing the status quo. We need to do something different. So I proposed a whole review of going through every single thing. And yeah, it is a lot of extra work this year. It's not something I'd like to do every year. But the idea is that we'll have a list of things that we can look at with the public. We're not going to do that consultation through the summer. We're going to do that in the end of August into September, and then come back to council in the fall with the budget process that we can look at. Anytime you reduce or remove services, it is a very difficult, uncomfortable conversation. It affects people. It affects a lot of people negatively, but I don't know, there's really no other way to do that. It's all municipal services. So if there is another solution, let's find it. But everybody talks about these other forms of taxation, all these other things, but right now this is kind of where we're at, and these are the tools we have available.
Yeah. Supplemental.
Yeah, just one thing. So the 29th meeting on July 29th, that's when we can come with our craziest out of the box ideas. The directors will be here and be like, yeah, no, that won't work. Like, when does that conversation happen and be like, hey, I got this crazy idea. and then it's like, let's look at it, or yeah, no, that's stupid.
That could be anytime through this whole process, yeah.
But you'd want to do it sooner than, to me,
Well-
I would want to do that sooner than later.
Yeah.
Personally, like, hey, what about looking at this? I wouldn't want to say that in November or January. I'm just curious, like, when do we have those conversations where it's like, well, let's throw something at the wall and see if it's even possible to do, or is that completely off basis?
No, it never has been. And that was by going by department, the interaction with council at any of those times that could happen. And I guess the only thing I'd ever say is if we wanted to cut something off is that we're having the meeting on July 29th. And at that point, I'm hoping to have a list that we can talk to the public about. So I got time through the summer to create a public consultation document that would run then in August, late August and into September. That would be the only kind of time constraint on that conversation, if you wanted to make that list of public consultation points or not.
Councillor Stetsky.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate being asked, but we spent a lot of time and energy and effort on developing the budget that we're working with this year. And I guess from my perspective, if, as prices increase, there are things that you cannot do on the list, then you'll bring that forward for next year's budget for consideration as it should be. But again, if you can get everything done that's on the list with 8.32% that we approved and we're living with this year, then go ahead and get it done from my perspective. But yeah, I guess that's a fairly simple approach, but so I would like to hear back if there are things that you can't accomplish that we did approve, and it's because of the priority things cost more money than we had anticipated and you had anticipated. I'd like to hear that for sure, and then we'd consider it for next year's budget.
Councillor Graham?
Thank you. Yeah, well, I guess if this is an opportunity to ask crazy questions, then let's go. I have a question for Staff Sergeant Graham. What I'm wondering is, Barry, with the ever rising increase of the RCMP, like, it's becoming unaffordable. So how do we manage those costs so that we can provide the service? And the only way that I can see that happening is a reduction in members. Like, I think we need to look at a reduction of members, and we need to look at a way that we can employ community safety officers that then are more nimble, feet on the ground, but that are still managed by the RCMP. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that and how or what that would work like, because the RCMP's pricing themselves out of the market, in my opinion, and we're seeing that.
Thank you. Mayor Price, Councillor Graham. Prices are going up, definitely. That is the theme. Regular members, we've pitched and successfully lobbied for the watch clerks to take a lot of the administrative component off. To be honest, like, we had 24 municipally funded police officers in 1996, and I don't know how far before that it goes. We hit our peak of 26 funded in 2011. So we really haven't put ourselves out of the market here. We've absorbed the extra workload. Right now, our staff are dealing with double. And it's not the municipality's problem that we have a lot of people off. We have a vacancy issue. We have people transferring, promoting, that we're not going to see the turnaround coming quick. And I believe my numbers, I'm not an accountant, but we could be returning over $1 million to the city this year in unused salary. So we are looking at innovative ways, whether it's community safety officer or more support staff or something that we can be more efficient with what we do. But we still need police officers. Drones are not replacing us yet. We don't have RoboCop. We've established minimums in 1996 of 3 people. 3 people between the other side of Jaffrey to Irishman's Creek, up to Wycliffe down to the US border. And when you're in Jaffrey or Southview or wherever and 2 officers are somewhere else, yeah, you need help. So there's certain things that we can't cut back on. We may look at going to an on-call system. When we look at our calls for service, they drop at certain times a day. We're open to anything. We're pushing. One of the things we've done right now is We have a review by the province, by the RCMP's Operations Strategy Branch, and we're quite confident that they will recognize that they need more of the provincial component here. It should not be all on the municipality. We're going to lobby both sides. I'm not going to lay off on the municipality either, but we need more police officers to make the community safer, and everything we can do to enhance it with the support that we've gotten. We are asking for more support staff from the province as well, and we'll do our best to do that. But it's a fair question.
Yeah, and I think just to build on that, it's not about, I look at it as a way to build capacity in a different manner. You don't have the bodies aren't coming here from the RCMP. So how can we take an expensive Cadillac model, get a Buick that still has capacity with a proper community safety officer, so have bylaw trained up a bit, that you still manage. Now you can have 4 or 6 of these officers that are hired by locally. They want to be in the city. They choose to be here, and they have a directive from bylaw and yourself that then we have these officers that are out there dealing with what they can be dealing with as community safety officers. And that's like, what one officer is $250,000. A community safety officer, we could be looking at 96. So I'm looking at ways that here's the pool. How can we get the bodies that we need to be doing the patrols where you still need somebody out in Jaffrey? Well, it's not a community safety officer, but at least we have folks here as well that can be utilized. Because I know when it comes to bylaw, we have a limited resource of bylaw officers, and if they're constantly dealing with mental health issues, they're not dealing with what other bylaw issues are in the community, because there are a lot of other bylaw issues. So I'm looking at ways that we can be creative, and then, okay, well, you know what, this is what we can fund. Here's what we can bring in, so we actually have bodies. And how does this work? And maybe, emergency services as a whole has a global budget, and it ebbs and flows. And I think it could be similar with fire.
It's a fair question, Councillor Graham. And anything that we want to divert from fire to the RCMP to get out there, we'll look after that. But it's about efficiency. It's looking at what the community safety officers can do. If there are limitations, I can't tell you right now the whole scope of what they do, but to sit down and say, well, maybe instead of asking for the extra funded municipal police officer or regular member next year, we instead of asking for 2, we ask for 1 and 2 community safety officers. I'm not opposed to it. We just need to look at the risk of the community, because at the end of the day, we come with all the tools, we come with all the way of stopping every offender and every offense, and we can't go back. We're regressing, and when we regress, the province pays for it. That's the unfortunate part, is that we need more people to be able to spend our budget, and when we have those more people, but like the unfunded proposal that we made, it was fantastic. That is the only thing keeping us from collapse right now, because it is a roller coaster. People go through different things. It's not a great return when somebody's selected for a position somewhere and they're out in 90 days and their replacement may not be 6 to 9 months. It's flawed. But if we can get ahead of it, and that's different from what we're dealing with today to pitch, but we will try to be better so that we can control it. The more people we have, we can run vacancies. We did in the fall, in the spring, early spring here, actually, we were technically on paper overstaffed. And it was, I'd say this would never come. It came. And we quickly got 3 members out, 2 to help Golden, 1 to help Creston. In the hockey world, the salary cap's reduced, and we're returning $440,000 from last year based on that. So again, different conversation, but I look forward to discussing these things in every way we can do it, like from the watch clerks taking the reports to Crown, doing the bail packages, all these different things that takes the pressure off, that gets us out on the road. If a community safety officer can absorb a certain amount of things, we're looking forward to what the community engagement coordinator can do to take some of the pressure off when it comes to dealing with the businesses and some of the community stuff. But there's nothing off the table. I'm not going to tell you that we're the only gig in town, but we still need a core of regular members. We can't dial back. It's about what we're moving forward with.
Hey, Mary, a question on that. I think there's an assumption, right or wrong. I probably, I think it's probably wrong that a municipal policing is cheaper than the RCMP right now. Since the RCMP got the raises, I'm not buying that totally. I mean, I know in Nelson, I looked at the municipal policing, and Nelson's got a bill that we couldn't afford that here, quite frankly, what our costs would be. Is there any cost-saving administrative or procedural functions in city police that we could apply, that the RCMP could apply to make the operations more cost effective? Or do your operations sort of run on parallel types of processes and procedures?
It's a great question, Mayor Price. We're bound by so many restrictive rules and policies. That is one disadvantage. We come with like the CPIC system, national system, where other organizations had to pay to access that. We come with a lot of things, but the complications, I think there's something like 240 different contracts for the fit up of just a police car. So those things, the red tape that we have to go through to get something, we have to drive vehicles till they're not as safe as they were when they rolled off the lot, like 160,000 kilometers. And realistically, if you were a municipal force, you could decide to do that at the end of warranty. And we're not losing time and the expensive repairs. Like, you wouldn't run your vehicles that way, and they're ridden hard. And there are a number of things that there are efficiencies for. When it all adds up, I don't think it's advantageous, but it's something to explore and look at what we could do.
Yeah, and what I'm looking for is it's just volume of numbers and allowing, provide some breathing room for yourself to cover more of the police work and allow some of these community safety officers to maybe deal with a bit more of the bylaw and the health check-ins, where it frees it up a bit. And that's kind of where, like, my whole premise is on that, is like, how can we get to a point where we can, have the community feeling like there's good visibility and good presence, and we have, it's a multi-layered approach. And that's the question, and I'll put it on that list, and council can debate whether there's going to be any staff time put into doing research on what the differences are, because there will have, like, you just can't say, oh yeah, that sounds great, it happens, like there. So I was curious about that, and thank you for answering those questions, because I think it's just good conversations that we have to have. And I guess my other question would be to Chief Driver. What would be the reality of having, we've moved from our fire service into handling some EMT, and I think they've done a really good job at that, and I know that there's a lot of effort went into that. What would be the reality of having a couple of our fire guys that are out, whether they're doing, they're checking buildings or they're out cruising around, that were trained in basic bylaw? Like, is that even something that would be considered? So we have a bit of eyes and ears out there, or is that, I just look at it for, with EMT, is bylaw an option with our fire department?
Yeah, so I'd say at this point, we've kind of hit our ceiling in terms of disposable time or where we have discrepancy to use time. If we're not doing business inspections, we're doing training. If we're not doing that, we're doing calls. We're pretty much with the staffing level that we have is we're our heads up against the glass ceiling, and we're kind of got a sore neck at this point. But we obviously have opportunities to remove other services and add those services. I would look similar to the conversation that you have with our Staff Sergeant Graham, is that moving some of the fire department enforcement stuff that's in our fire service bylaw towards the bylaw service to do it rather than the fire department to do it would probably be more economical. Some of the campfire enforcement and those types of things.
Councilor Brissette?
Not along that line, but I just remember CFO Osborne discussion about the Cranbrook Golf Course and our costs. I'm not, like, this is foggy, just about subsidizing, is it water costs or I forget what, but there's something there, and it wasn't brought up in the recreational thing. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Councilor Blissett through Mayor Price. We're not talking about the permissive tax exemption?
Yes.
We are?
Mhm.
Yeah, so the Cranbrook Golf Course receives a 50% permissive tax exemption. In the past, they had a higher percentage, up to, I think, around 75 at one point, 75%. So over the years, we've reduced it, and last year we moved them into the permissive tax exemption policy, that section under the community charter that everyone else is under, section 224, I believe it is. And per our policy, any sports-related facility is maxed out at a 50% permissive tax exemption.
Okay.
That's where the golf course sits right now, and I believe their exemption is worth $12,000, something like that.
Okay.
The only other facility in that category is Kisa, is the Dome, and also similarly a maximum of 50% permissive tax exemption. One final point on the golf course. They historically have received a multi-year permissive tax exemption. Last year, their tax exemption was only for 1 year. And I believe they'll be submitting an application this year, and they may be requesting another multi-year exemption. I have continuously talked to them about the value of the service they provide
Yeah.
in terms of, you know, are there, do you have youth-free golf lessons? Do you, you know, what other sort of benefits do you provide for the community? So they have responded to that. Now, whether council sees that as an actual benefit to the citizens that would warrant a permissive tax exemption is a separate point of discussion.
Sure. And is there anything on water consumption as well, or are they paying the full rate on?
The golf course has a well or wells.
Not us.
So they're not on
Okay.
city water, no.
Just while we're on that, I think that's something that we need to look at is permissive. Sorry, go ahead.
Pardon me, thank you, Curtis. The clubhouse is on water and sewer. Yeah, but not the golf course
Yeah, they've got
itself.
their own wells. So we need to look seriously at permissive tax exemptions, and then I think that, you know, if we think how we got here and part of this exercise, next year, you know, at 2025, we were looking at 8.59. And somebody at one of the meetings said, that's unacceptable. Look at the, you know, the feedback we got this year and the pushback from the public. We said, it was Councillor Graham suggested or made a motion, we start at 5 or something this year. That's where we are, we're at 5. And if we want 5 that badly, and we're true to that, then certainly staff has got their work cut out for them to see where they can either, and it's not all about cut, either cut or, you know, improve the revenues or efficiencies or anything along the line, but our role as well. And council sometimes, you know, if we can't afford it, it's real simple. You know, council has to make some of those hard decisions, and that's the services and some of the stuff that we do provide. And so certainly, permissive tax exemption comes in, we can save 1% right off the top, grants and aid. And you know what? If we're serious about going to 5% or being 5 or under, and it takes the grants and aid, I'm sure that's 1%. And you know, and I'm not trying to be harsh, but the grants and aid, that is not a make or break for any organization. We've watched them over the years. That is not going to make or break any of those organizations that we fund every year. That's just a little bit to help them out. You know, we're in tough times. This is the taxpayer. When you look at the groups that do come to us, it equates to that 1%. It's all sort of special interest over here and here and here, right? So, you know, if we're looking at the whole community at large to the 1%, well, let's lose that 1%. That's a recommendation come from me if we have to get down to there. Councillor Stetsky.
Yeah, just quickly on the Cranbrook Golf Course, I said it at the time and I'll say it again. I think 50% tax exemption should only apply if they're open for public use year round. And that would include then opening it up to snowshoeing, cross-country skiing in the winter. That should be one of the criteria that you qualify. You have to be available to the public, open year round, not just the clubhouse.
So Charlotte, on the golf course, and this is going way back, when wasn't it like a community golf course, wasn't there some kind of a condition at one time that there had to be consideration for tax exemptions or something when that was first passed over, something back in the day?
Mayor Price, there was something very, very far back where there was, it looked like it was it had possibly been a city-run golf course, or the city had had more of a hand in it. And it was then, like, I mean, I'm talking 1940, 1930. And of course, at the time, they were the only golf course, and they were one of, you know, probably fairly small number of amenities available to the residents. So I think, you know, the golf course, the idea of the golf course back at that time was much different than it is today. No competition, but there was something, and I would hesitate to commit myself to anything specific, but there was something, and how accurate that is, I'm not entirely sure, because it's very, very old information.
Yeah.
But there is no requirement for the city to provide a permissive tax exemption to the golf course. All permissive tax exemptions are at the discretion of council, as are the grants and aid.
Yeah, thanks, Charlotte. You're not suggesting that I brought it up, that it's very old information just because I brought it up? No? Okay, anything further? Okay, Charlotte, back to you.
Okay, I do not have anything else for today's committee of the whole meeting. So thank you, council, for an excellent discussion. I wasn't here for the first portion of this committee of the whole, but Charlene was happy to stand in, and I understand did a fine job. And we're, as council, or as CAO Furcho has said, this is a case of leave no stone unturned. We're looking at everything, a little bit of no idea is a bad idea. Let's talk about it. Let's see how we can get down to 5%, because I can assure you that will be extremely challenging. To get from where we are now to 5% is $1.3 million. And that does not take into account any of the increases that we would be picking up that we were not aware of when we adopted earlier this year. So it will be extremely challenging.
Thank you, Charlotte. And the last item for this committee meeting is a report from our Social Development Coordinator, Marcel Germer, regarding,
Mayor Price, if we could just take a 5-minute break, because Marcel went on site. I was
Yeah,
told
you
her
bet.
if she could come back, if she could make it back, but I'm just going to double check if she's back.
yeah, we'll short recess. Reconvene the committee of the whole meeting. And the floor is yours, Marcel.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. I think today was basically to request that Council receive the update from the social development on the site known as, previously known as Moyer and now known as Common Ground. And just kind of update that we did have a couple of town halls, I think 2 weeks ago, that were fairly well attended. I think they were also well attended by council, so I'm not sure if council has any questions on that. And just to open the floor a little bit to see if there is questions or before and moving forward.
Okay. Councilor Stetsky?
You want a motion to, as per,
Yeah, you know what, you've got
then have some discussion?
yeah, we've got a motion here. I'll read that out first, then we'll do some questions. Yeah, could I get a motion that council received the staff report update on Common Grounds, the site adjacent to Moyer Park, currently used for temporary outdoor living space? Mover, Councilor Stetsky.
Just a point of order, we're in the committee of the whole, so there is no motions.
Oh, no, yes, there isn't.
It's just recommendations to council.
Yeah, and so thank you for that, Councillor Graham. We were just talking about that as well.
Yeah.
So we slipped on that one a little bit, and the concept was simply that council get the information today. That was all that we were looking for.
Yeah. Yeah. We receive it for information. Yep, okay. Yeah, good. Comments, questions? Councilor Stetsky.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. When the Human Rights Commissioner was here in Cranbrook, she talked a little bit about the situation right across British Columbia. And one of the points that she made, which I thought was important, was basically she said that water toilets and garbage in essence were human rights. And that regardless of the situation, the community, that those needed to be or should be provided for people that are living without roofs over their heads. Now, that doesn't mean the city has to provide them, but where are we in terms of assuming this goes ahead and providing those things to the people that might be up in Moyer?
There is water on site now. We have placed 6,000-liter totes up there, and they've been full of water and accessible to the people living up there. We've also put a dumpster on site, and garbage cans will be out there this week. We are still waiting on word of the outhouse. We're planned to be up there. And we won't be putting the hygiene station, which is the hand washing station, out until we know when the outhouse will be ready.
You used the term "we" for all of those.
Again, so when I'm saying we, that's the mayor's task force. This is all coming through the mayor's task force, but being funded provincially and through grants.
Councillor Graham?
Yeah, thank you. I think one of the biggest concerns, and I don't know how it gets addressed, is the liability. If you know, we did see a grass fire up there, but if there is a fire and it takes out a trailer park or it moves into industrial park, will the city be held liable for that because of a sanctioned encampment? And to me, this is, we're allowing our bylaws currently right now to be broken because the bylaws don't allow that up there. So we are allowing that up there. Are we held responsible for anything like that? Because the insurance companies are ruthless. So they're going to come after the city. Are we protected?
We will turn it to Scott for a moment, but I know when we met with the solicitor that if anybody camps on city property anywhere in the city, the liability is going to be the same. This is not a city designated encampment. It is a site where we're not enforcing the bylaw in the moment. So they do not know. There's never been a chance or a time where it's been taken to court. So he said the liability is the same to whoever, and nobody's responsible per se right now because nobody's taking ownership of homelessness. So I would say the liability is yet to be tested, and Scott may have.
Mark, Scott?
Maybe just before Scott gets in, so Marcel, you kind of covered what I was going to say in response to that. Is the city has homeless camps all over, and that conversation would take place anywhere in terms of like when we had the one by the chamber where the propane bottles blew up and their trees were on fire, and we have homeless camps and tent fires all over the city all the time. That's the nature of that beast. To say this one is different isn't really true, other than the fact that some organizations and groups have funded helping some of the human rights things, as Councillor Stetsky mentioned, on that site, and the bylaws isn't being enforced as much. We haven't created a city of Cranbrook sanctioned and set up site in order to create any kind of residential tenancy or other liabilities. It's a homeless camp on public property. Homeless camps are allowed to be on public property as the law currently stands. That this one is no different, and our liability is no different. And I still, even though there's things being put on the site as far as the city goes, I still consider it a homeless camp that's temporary like any other one that we simply can remove anything that's put on there at any time with the bylaws. So,
Councillor Graham?
Yeah, I guess just how I would view it differently is all of the other encampments around town or tenting spots around town, the tents have at least come down once. And that's what I'm like, if you look at it, it's like, sure, there's these things, but we have gone and we have made the tents come down and they reappear, there's a fire. Like, I just worry sick about liability and the fact that we relax the bylaws or we turn a blind eye. At least if there was a fire that happened at Ridgeview, we could say, well, we've been there a couple of times, we've made them take tents down, right? Like that's my point on it, is that if something was to happen, it's like, well, we can't fall back and say, well, 2 weeks ago we were there, we made the tents come down because it's against the bylaw. They just chose to reset them up. That's where I'm going on the liability piece, is that do we have plausible deniability that we can say, oh yeah, no, it just happened. So that's my worry, and how do we reconcile that?
So two levels to that. One is, we still are going to monitor, and if we see risk, this tents still are going to be required to come down. Secondly, this site, we've already hardened it somewhat, and we're going to harden it more, and Scott will talk about that in terms of the protection from fire, where that hasn't been done on any of these other sites. When you have the ravine behind the Chamber of Commerce, when you have all along the creek sides, when you have in the forest areas in and around Cranbrook, and especially as soon as you leave the city proper boundaries, we have homeless camps that are in the RD right on the border of the city that are set up and fairly permanent as you go around the city towards the SPCA or up Perry Creek. These are camps that are what you just described, very permanent camps. And they're not being addressed in the wildfire, and the other risks are to the city of Cranbrook, even though they may not be right in the city. So definitely a complex issue. And this one, yes, it's pushing the boundary, but I want to maintain that it is not a city sanctioned site. If there's violations, they will be addressed. We are going to harden as much as we can, but we are also, the only thing we're doing differently here is offering not the city, but there's groups offering through the organization, through the mayor's task force, a little more comfort in those human rights issues of water, sewer, and sanitation.
Because there is this liability that lies in if we don't do anything and somebody dies from heat or no water or no shelter. I mean, the liability is for that of living rough is high in anywhere, but is it the city's liability or the province's liability or the federal government's liability? Like, it hasn't settled anywhere as of right yet.
Scotty, you have a comment on that?
Yeah, I just did want to add, I was going to speak to this later at the regular council meeting, but this is a good time because the conversation did come up, and not necessarily on the side of legal liability for sanctioning a site, but in terms of risk management, is the fire department's been working since earlier in the spring to come up with a prescribed burn plan for this fall to burn the lot. The Moyer Park lot from the entirety of it up to the baseball diamonds, excluding where the tents are actually located. And so we're using the road guard, the road that's currently in there to provide access for healthcare in our vehicles, sort of as a guard for that site where they're going to be located. Everything on the outside of that to the edge of the property, we're planning on doing a controlled burn this fall in partnership with the province and the prescribed fire training program that they're setting up in the southeast. Additionally, I came to Mark last week, and you'll probably see at the 29th council meeting a request for more money out of the wildfire mitigation funds that we have for this purpose, just for wildfire mitigation projects that come up. Just a mid-season bump in money to get another guard put on the perimeter of that so that our equipment can access the property more safely and to be used as part of the prescribed burn control line. So it's partially going to be funded by grant money. I don't think that's going to be enough to be able to use it for an equipment access road. So I'm going to ask council to supplement that with some of those wildfire mitigation funds and just combine the projects to make that safer to the business owners, to the private forested property adjacent to us, and reduce the risk to community for that high risk activity happening in our community.
Scott, in your opinion right now, so that we've kind of got that access in, and it's kind of a guard and an access road in through and around the camp right now. I haven't been right up in the camp, but I've driven up by the area there, and it certainly looks like the vegetation is just basically grassland where the camp is. So something happened in that camp right now, in your opinion, to get into the Steuben subdivision. That's the closest, and of course we got the prevailing wind going the other way. But do you feel we have enough defensible space there that you guys could respond in time? And
so depending on the conditions is sort of a yes and no. And so that's why I've taken a really close look at it. I've got my burn boss trainees building a prescription for that property to make it even safer. And we'll continuously do fuel management activity on that property going forward if it's going to be used in this manner. It's just, we're just trying to balance risk with space and try and make sure that it's covered. So I do feel like we do, as a fire department, we can do and should do more activity up there to make sure it's getting done. We have partners that are going to supply some of the resources to get that done, and I'm really happy about that. And so we'll just work that into our system and continue to treat it that way. But it is a low risk, kind of low hazard
Low risk.
burn if we were to do it under controlled circumstances. So I'd rather do that than wait.
Thank you. Councillor Stetsky.
And thank you. Yeah, important initiative for sure. There was a grass fire up in Moyer. Were you able to determine the ignition source for that?
So we did determine that it was human caused. There was no lightning in the area. The RCMP are continuing to look into who may have started it.
Yeah, I mean, really, down that area, it's going to be a ground fire. So, yeah. Okay.
And we have, like we say, we're taking some precautions. We have put fire extinguishers up our site. We have 2 people up there that are reliable to use the fire extinguishers. We have those in place. We're also doing weed eating around the area where any tents may go. They built the pads in gravel, so there's a 12-foot gravel space right around where any tent. And again, there's no people occupying that space that we're creating right now. But there is still people that have been living up there for just about a year now that are still there on the private property that borders this space. So nothing has changed as far as people living there and stuff. We're trying to create all of the safety that we can before anybody accesses the site.
Thank you. Further? Thanks, Marcel.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
That completes the agenda of the committee of the whole meeting. How can I get a motion to adjourn the committee of the whole meeting? Councillor Graham, Councillor Brissette, favor? Meeting adjourned.